From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Fortunately, we had a good saying that we've held firm to this day, as the dean was reminding me before the talk, which is what happens at Georgetown Prep stays at Georgetown Prep. That's been a good thing for all of us, I think.
As the FBI expands the scope of its probe into Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, we'll speak with a former student at Kavanaugh's private high school, Georgetown Prep, who's calling on fellow graduates to come forward if they have information about any sexual assaults possibly committed by Brett Kavanaugh. Then we speak to the American Civil Liberties Union, which for only the fourth time in its history has come out opposed to Supreme Court nominee. Now the ACLU is running ads in key states against Brett Kavanaugh.
We've seen this before, denials from powerful men.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
I've never seen anything like this.
I categorically and unequivocally deny the allegation against me by Dr. Ford.
America is watching. And as we choose a lifetime seat on our highest court, integrity matters, and we cannot have any doubt.
And we'll look at the new trade deal between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Will it benefit workers and protect the environment? We'll speak with Lori Wallach of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump said Monday he wants the FBI to expand the scope of its investigation into Brett Kavanaugh, even as he said the Supreme Court nominee had been treated unfairly by the media, and promised the FBI would work quickly to complete its probe.
I want them to do a very comprehensive investigation, whatever that means according to the senators and the Republicans and the Republican majority. I want them to do that. I want it to be comprehensive. The Washington Post reports the slightly expanded investigation will now include a look into allegations by a third Kavanaugh accuser, Julie Swetnick, who says she observed Kavanaugh at high school parties in the 80s, joining efforts to inebriate girls so they could be gang raped. The FBI won't have much time to complete its work. Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said he's planning a vote on Kavanaugh's confirmation by the end of the week. This comes as NBC News is reporting Kavanaugh and his team worked behind the scenes to refute claims of sexual misconduct by his former Yale classmate, Deborah Ramirez. Before her claims went public, Ramirez told The New Yorker Kavanaugh exposed himself to her by thrusting his genitals in her face at a drunken dorm party when they were both Yale freshmen. NBC reports Kavanaugh personally contacted former classmates ahead of publication by The New Yorker, urging them to go on the record in his defense. This contradicts Judge Kavanaugh's sworn testimony to Senator Orrin Hatch in the Thursday hearing that he only learned about Ramirez's allegations from The New Yorker article. Meanwhile, a former classmate of Kavanaugh said Monday he watched as a drunken Brett Kavanaugh got into a bar fight near the campus of Yale University after the pair attended a reggae concert in 1985. This is Chad Ludington speaking on CNN.
Brett said, you, or something to that effect, and threw the ice at the guy. The guy, understandably, even though he had been aggressive in his response, found that was one step too far. So he took a swing at Brett, and then they were kind of, two guys fighting.
The FBI is investigating the 1985 bar fight in which Kavanaugh was questioned by New Haven police, but not arrested. Protests against Kavanaugh's nomination continue to rage across the country. In West Virginia, 17 women gathered inside the Charleston, West Virginia office of Democratic Senator Joe Manchin Monday, saying they'll occupy the space until Manchin pledges to vote no on Kavanaugh's confirmation. In Washington, D.C.'s National Airport, women survivors of sexual assault tried to speak with Senator Mitch McConnell Monday as he walked across a terminal, but were ignored by the Republican Majority Leader.
Senator McConnell, why do women have to bare their whole soul to you?
Victims of sexual assault, their stories support them, Mr. McConnell. How many stories of sexual violence do you need to hear in order to believe women?
In New York City, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the Yale Club in Manhattan Monday before marching to Grand Central Station to protest Kavanaugh's nomination. This is Trey Kwan, an activist with the New York State Nurses Association and editor of Left Voice.
Or some of us recall from the news Anita Hill 15 years ago. We are here to make sure another Anita Hill does not go down. She was dissected in front of a stony-faced wall of white men. She was humiliated doubly, first with the sexist harassment from Clarence Thomas, and again by a system that caps women and does not allow the truth to be heard and does not allow truth to be spoken to power. We are here today to make sure that does not happen again.
President Trump is under fire for belittling women reporters at Monday's news conference in the Rose Garden. This is Trump calling on ABC News' Cecilia Vega for the first question of the news conference.
Okay, question? Yeah, go ahead. Sure. She's shocked that I picked her.
No.
She's like in a state of shock.
I'm not thinking, Mr.
That's
President.
okay. I know you're not thinking. You never do.
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
The president saying, I know you're not thinking, you never do. The White House has come under fire for editing the transcript of Trump's comments to say, I know you're not thanking, instead of thinking. The Supreme Court began a new session Monday amidst the ongoing saga of Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the open 9th seat on the bench. The court's opening case involves the preservation of an endangered frog species, the dusky gopher, pitting the government against the timber giant Weyerhaeuser, which is seeking to develop land that's been designated as critical habitat for the frog. The court also rejected an appeal to review a 2017 case upholding the legality of the ban on new uranium mining near the Grand Canyon, a decision celebrated by environmental and Native American groups who live in the protected area. In Indonesia, the death toll from Friday's massive earthquake and tsunami is at over 1,200 people. It's expected to continue rising as the United Nations humanitarian organization said more than 190,000 people are in urgent need of aid. Among the dead are 34 students whose bodies were found buried Monday after a landslide engulfed their church. Another 52 at the site remain missing. Critics say officials were caught off guard by the unexpected strength of a tsunami resulting from a 7.5 magnitude quake and called off a tsunami warning too early. Iran's Revolutionary Guard said Monday it fired a barrage of missiles into eastern Syria in retaliation for the deadly attack in Avaz last month. Iran believes the Avaz attack, which killed 29 people and wounded 70 others at a military parade in the southwestern city of Iran, is the responsibility of separatists supported by the United States and Saudi Arabia. Reports on casualties from Monday's strike are unconfirmed. Scores of protesters were injured Monday in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem as Palestinians and Arab citizens of Israel clashed with Israeli forces during a strike to protest Israel's Jewish nation-state law. The law, which passed in July, declares only Jews have the right to national self-determination and established Hebrew as the official language. This is protester Hasni Sultan.
We are here united, and our message is one message against the nation-state law, which aims at separating us from the lands of our fathers and grandparents.
First Lady Melania Trump has arrived in Ghana as part of her first major solo international trip. The First Lady will visit Ghana, Kenya, Malawi, and Egypt over the coming week. In January, Democratic lawmakers said President Trump referred to Haiti, El Salvador, and unspecified African nations as being, quote, S-hole countries. During a closed-door meeting at the White House, Trump has denied making the remarks. In Barcelona, Spain, baton-wielding police broke up demonstrations and sit-in protests by Catalan independence activists Monday as an estimated 180,000 people marched on the first anniversary of a referendum on independence that was banned by Spanish authorities. Riot police clashed with demonstrators outside the headquarters of Spain's national police after activists occupied roads, a highway, and a high-speed rail line, stopping traffic for hours. A year ago, more than 800 people were injured after Spanish police stormed polling stations and tried to forcibly prevent people from voting in an independence referendum, firing tear gas and physically attacking prospective voters. In Japan, voters in In Japan, voters in Okinawa have elected a new governor who's promised to oppose the long-running U.S. military presence on the Japanese island. Denny Tamaki has vowed to block the controversial relocation of a U.S. military base, a move which is likely to upset both the central government and the United States, which has long depended on Okinawa to accommodate its military bases and personnel. Many residents of the small island have opposed the U.S. military's presence for decades. This is Governor-elect Tamaki.
Over 2 generations, governors have protested the new bases at Hanoko and have been ignored. But now the gubernatorial government has already withdrawn its permission for the base's land reclamation project, and the prefectural government has used the proper process based on what is best for the good of the public. I will continue to let the central government understand that not abiding by this process is undemocratic and is against the rule of law.
Back in the United States, mourners came together in Las Vegas, Nevada, Monday to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of the 58 people who were killed and more than 850 others wounded at a country music festival in the worst mass shooting in modern U.S. history. Hotels along the famed Las Vegas Strip dimmed their marquee lights as officials read the names of the victims at the dedication of a memorial garden, and survivors formed a human chain around the site of the deadly attack. The anniversary came and went as President Trump and the Republican-led Congress have enacted no major new gun control policies. In March, the Justice Department proposed a rule that would ban the sale of bump stocks like those used in the Las Vegas massacre, which turned semi-automatic rifles into fully automatic machine guns. But President Trump has yet to sign an executive order. On Monday, he declared the bump stocks ban would take effect in 2 or 3 weeks.
In order to terminate bump stocks, we have to go through a procedure. We are now at the final stages of that procedure. In fact, the lawyers were just telling me, and over the next couple of weeks, I'll be able to write it up. But you can't just write it up because rules and regulations in this country are really tough, even for something like that. So we're knocking out bump stocks. I've told the NRA, I've told it, bump stocks are gone.
A number of states have implemented their own gun control measures recently, including California, which has just signed bills that increase the minimum age for purchasing rifles and shotguns from 18 to 21 and ban the possession of firearms for people convicted of domestic violence and those who've been hospitalized for mental health issues more than once in a 1-year period. In Sweden, prominent French-Swedish photographer Jean-Claude Arnault has been convicted of rape and sentenced to 2 years in prison. The case created a firestorm around the Swedish Academy, the organization that awards the Nobel Prize in Literature, and resulted in the postponement of this year's top prize for authors. Arnault is married to one of the Swedish Academy's members, and the Academy has admitted it was aware of sexual assault allegations against him in 1996, but took no action. In sports news, Carolina Panthers safety Eric Reid reported to practice for the first time in 9 months after the football player spent the better part of a year as an unsigned free agent following his participation in protests during the national anthem, led by San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick. Speaking to reporters Monday wearing a shirt that read, "I'm with Cap," Eric Reid said he would not rule out further protests.
Next year will be 2019. It'll mark 400 years since the first slaves touched the soil in this country. That's 400 years of systemic oppression. That's slavery, Jim Crow, new Jim Crow, mass incarceration, you name it. The Great Depression, they come out with a New Deal. Black people didn't have access to those government stimulus packages. The New Deal set up what is known as the modern-day middle class. We didn't have access to those programs, the GI Bill, Social Security, home loans, none of that. So this has been happening since my people have gotten here.
Online retail giant Amazon says it's raising its company-wide minimum wage to $15 per hour for all its U.S. employees. The announcement comes amidst a union organizing effort at Whole Foods grocery stores, which are owned by Amazon, and amidst mounting complaints over labor conditions at Amazon's warehouses. And congratulations to Democracy Now! Correspondent Sharif Abdel-Quddus, who won an Emmy last night alongside journalist Layla Alarian and the Al Jazeera English Fault Lines team for their reporting on the Trump administration's travel ban. This is Layla Alarian at the awards ceremony Monday night.
Our story is about the Trump administration's travel ban, how it unfolded, and who it affected. We tell the story of a Syrian refugee family that was supposed to come to the U.S., but ultimately couldn't because of the ban. As the policy was being challenged in court, 6-year-old Yahya died in a hospital in Turkey. His parents' hope was that he'd be able to get medical treatment here. This award is dedicated to his memory.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. The White House has authorized the FBI to partially expand its investigation into Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, but the agency is still being forced to wrap up its probe this week. The focus of the investigation is on allegations made by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford that Kavanaugh attempted to rape her in 1982. But the FBI has also reached out to Deborah Ramirez, a former classmate of Kavanaugh's at Yale, who says he thrust his genitals into her face during a party. While the FBI has talked to Ramirez, NBC News reports agents have not followed up on claims by their mutual friends that Kavanaugh asked them to go on the record in his defense prior to the publication of an article in The New Yorker outlining her allegations. Former Yale classmate Carrie Burcham says she tried to give the FBI text messages proving that Kavanaugh and or his friends, quote, may have initiated an anticipatory narrative as early as July in order to, quote, conceal or discredit Ramirez.
NBC reports Brett Kavanaugh tried to obtain a photograph from a 1997 wedding, quote, in order to show himself smiling alongside Ramirez 10 years after they graduated, unquote. While the two did appear in the same group photo, a friend of Ramirez said she attempted to stay far away from Kavanaugh and his friends during the wedding. Kavanaugh reportedly initiated the contact with former classmates before The New Yorker published its report about Ramirez on September 23rd. This seems to contradict his testimony Thursday when he was questioned by Republican Senator Orrin Hatch.
When was the first time that the ranking member or her staff asked you about these allegations?
Today.
When did you first hear of Ms. Ramirez's allegations against you?
In the period since then, in the New Yorker story.
Did the ranking member or any of her colleagues or any of their staffs ask you about Ms. Ramirez's allegations before they were leaked to the press?
No.
When was the first time that the ranking member or any of her colleagues or any of their staff asked you about Ms. Ramirez's allegations?
Today.
This comes as the Washington Post reports the slightly expanded investigation will now include a look into allegations by a third Kavanaugh accuser, Julie Swetnick, who says she observed Kavanaugh at high school parties in the 1980s, joining efforts to inebriate girls so they could be gang raped. Recently resurfaced 1983 yearbooks from Georgetown Prep show students bragging about the use of killer cues during Beach Week, a possible reference to Quaaludes, the sedative Bill Cosby used to drug women in order to rape them.
Now a group of alumni from Brett Kavanaugh's all-male private high school has issued a call for fellow graduates of Georgetown Prep to come forward if they have information about any sexual assaults possibly committed by the Supreme Court nominee, saying in a petition, quote, please do not remain silent, even if speaking out comes at some personal cost. In a minute, we'll be joined by one of those alumni. But first, I want to turn to comments of Judge Kavanaugh made about Georgetown Prep. He was speaking at Catholic University's Columbus School of Law in 2015.
Fortunately, we had a good saying that we've held firm to this day, as the dean was reminding me before the talk, which is what happens at Georgetown Prep stays at Georgetown Prep. That's been a good thing for all of us, I think.
Well, for more, we're joined by Bill Barbeau. He was a freshman at the all-male Georgetown Prep High School when Brett Kavanaugh was a senior. After Kavanaugh's testimony Thursday, Barbeau co-authored the petition calling on fellow graduates to come forward if they have any information about any sexual assaults possibly committed by the Supreme Court nominee. Bill Barbeau is joining us by phone from the Washington, D.C. area. Bill, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you talk about why you started this petition and how many people have signed on so far?
Yeah, I was. We were first moved to do this because we felt that it was stunning to me that we, as a community, I believe, know so much about what was going on during the 80s in preps party culture, and that there were many graduates of the class of '83 who were close to Brett, but who have not shown their faces. They've not spoken out about what was going on, either in his defense or in Dr. Ford's defense. And so I was stunned by that silence and felt we have to try to do something to shake my classmates and my schoolmates up and get them to think this is an opportunity for you to do the right thing. And if our little petition and our drive to get them to speak gets even one of them to say something, then I feel it's been a success.
And Bill Barbeau, you were a freshman when Brett Kavanaugh was a senior at this school. How well did you know him? And when you saw the testimony, how did that jibe with your recollections of what he was like?
Well, I didn't know Brett personally, and I think it's important to note that I don't consider myself a witness in this case in any way, shape, or form. Again, I was a freshman. He was a senior. He was a very big personality on campus. He was a football player. He was captain of the basketball team. It was hard in a roughly 400-person school not to know who the real social leaders were, even as a freshman. So I knew him and his crew more by reputation than personal observation. However, it just struck me during his testimony that given what I know about preps party culture in the 80s, and knowing that he bragged openly on his yearbook page about his participation in that party culture, that he would rule out categorically the possibility that something untoward or downright illegal could have happened when he was under the influence of alcohol. And that just felt wrong to me. And I know that there must be people who are closer to him, closer in age and closer in social commingling, that have to know more about what was going on. And I think we've been seeing that from his Yale classmates, and I would like to see that from his prep classmates.
In 1990, the Washington Post reported that headmasters from 7 prestigious Washington, D.C. area private schools, including yours, Georgetown Prep and Kavanaugh's, had sent a letter to warn parents about a party culture among their children, which included heavy drinking, leading to, quote, sexual or violent behavior. The article quotes the headmaster at Holton Arms saying, quote, a number of parents and kids have expressed dismay over some of the situations at weekend parties. We're concerned about the potential for tragedy. Bill Barbeau, can you respond to that?
Yeah, I unfortunately wasn't familiar with that article when it was printed in 1990. That was when I was graduating from college. But what I read yesterday when it was first forwarded to me shocked me in some way, because it was an acknowledgement on the part of the administrations of the schools that we all went to that there was a severe problem, and it was a severe problem. But what is shocking and upsetting to me is that, as I understand it, not much institutionally has been done to really put a stop to it. And I know that there is a very, very steep hill to climb for educators in managing teenage kids. I know that as a parent of a teenager myself, my son's 17, it's not easy for parents to get involved. But I just feel like, wow, that was a long time ago, and we're still fighting the same battle with underage drinking and drug use, with a culture, a party culture, that seems to be accepting of illegal behavior and dangerous behavior. And I just wish that there was something more that we could have done in the 28 years plus that have transpired since that letter came out.
Now, you have close to 70 names on this letter that you issued. What do you hope to do with it, and what are you hope? Are all the people who've signed the petition willing to go public with their names, or?
Well, it's closer to 100 now. I actually didn't look at the number this morning. I should have. It's been growing since we released it on Saturday, which It's probably a tricky day to try to get people to pay attention to it, but since we've started to get some news coverage on it, we've been getting more and more signatories. And we've been very judicious with how we're going to proceed, because there are a number of folks who signed who, for various reasons, such as they're employed by the federal government, can't have their names released publicly, but they did sign it in that they wanted to indicate support. So we're having to be very thoughtful, and we're contacting everyone individually to make sure that they are aware that we intend to go public with their name, make sure that they are who they say they are, and that we didn't end up with some false entries. But the concern that I have right now is that I'm not all that sure how interested the FBI is in our list. They have their hands full, and that's what is so urgent about this situation to me. Is a week is not very much time for the FBI to conduct a very thorough investigation. They have to identify, locate, and interview a lot of people if they really want to get to the bottom of this. So they may have their hands full, which leads me to believe that the press may be a more effective way to get the word out and to get our letter to see the light of day, and for then fellow prep alumni to take the action of saying, you know what, I do have a story, and I do think it's important that it be heard.
Bill Barbeau, you said in an interview with the Washingtonian, consent as a concept did not even exist. It was not in our lexicon at Georgetown Prep. Explain.
Well, I feel culturally it's important to recognize that the 80s were a very different time and place for the country at large, not just in private schools, private all-boys schools. Everywhere, we weren't talking a whole lot about the sexual dynamic between boys and girls at the high school level. It just wasn't part of the conversation. When you compound that by having an all-boys private school that's Catholic, the likelihood of meaningful conversations between administrators, between parents and kids, coming up to try to recognize the fact that there are thousands of shades of grays between the gentlemanly conduct, which was the shorthand at the time to tell us how we were supposed to behave around girls, and down and out rape. There's so much nuance in there, and it's a lot to cover. And there needed to be, in retrospect, hindsight is always 20/20, a more concerted effort on the parts of parents, administrators, the school itself to lock horns with the fact that good kids do bad things, especially when alcohol is involved. And I think it's easy to criticize them now through the lens of 2018. But just to be very honest about the milieu in which we were operating at that time, we weren't talking about the subtleties of sexual dynamics. We were barely talking about the mechanics of sexuality. I learned most of what I knew about sexuality from my middle school health and sex education class, not from conversations that I was having in high school about how you know when it's okay to have sex and how you know when and how to stop yourself when it's not okay.
Oh, Brett Kavanaugh's senior yearbook page refers to him as, quote, Keg City Club treasurer, 100 kegs or bust, and says he was the, quote, biggest contributor to the Beach Week Ralph Club, as well as a reference to the Renati alumnus. Could you talk about these references that you saw in the yearbook and what they would mean to you as someone who was part of the school, a part of that school?
Sure. As with many private schools that have a whole page dedicated to each kid, it is a place for you to commemorate your time at school. It's your way of writing your name in the wet cement so that you're for all eternity locked down. It's a way to commemorate inside jokes that you have with your friends, and just to basically have a laugh, because we didn't have Instagram or Facebook then, so you couldn't go back and take a look at the old photos by any other means besides looking at your yearbook. So collectively, we all made up a lot of stuff. Some of it could have been exaggerated. Some of it could have been entirely faked. But what I saw on Brett's page was a championing of the drinking culture. And you don't, if you're an innocent choir boy who occasionally likes to have a beer, call yourself the captain of Keg City or whatever it was that he said. These are things that just don't sit right with me, and struck me as very much at odds with how he portrayed himself in his interview on Fox and how he portrayed himself in front of the Senate on Thursday.
Bill Barbeau, the editors of America magazine, the national weekly, published by the Jesuits of the United States, called for Kavanaugh's nomination to be withdrawn. Your school, Georgetown Prep, where Kavanaugh was a student when he allegedly assaulted Christine Blasey, is a Jesuit high school. Can you talk about what that meant to you when the Jesuits came out against Kavanaugh?
I felt it was a very powerful statement. I think that there are a lot of folks who are probably listening to me speak right now who are saying, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to take down your school? I'm not trying to take down my school. From my perspective, I'm trying to stand up for my school. I'm trying to stand up for all the good men who have gone through that school. I'm trying to stand up for what I believe were the values that were instilled in us as students there, of truth, of honesty, of integrity. And so I felt vindicated in a way by the Jesuits choosing to withdraw their nomination, because I think they recognized, as do I, that in Brett we have, like all of us, a flawed human being. But he's not acknowledging those flaws, and he's not embracing the fact that we all have pasts, we all have the ability and capacity to make mistakes, but you atone for them, you lock horns with them, you acknowledge them, you realize that you could have caused pain for another human being. You don't run away from it, you don't hide behind verbal gymnastics as he was doing on Thursday. And I felt proud that the Jesuits chose to recognize that and realize that we as a community of students and coming from that history and that legacy can do better and should do better.
And Bill Barbeau, you've gone out publicly with this petition. You've done interviews, but you're declining to be on air or seen publicly. Could you talk about why?
Well, Dr. Ford has received death threats, and she is obviously the key person in all of this. So I don't like to overstate that I'm somehow on equal importance as she is, but I am very concerned that this battle for Judge Kavanaugh's nomination is seen by many in the community as a proxy battle for other larger wars, such as the war against Roe v. Wade. And there are obviously numerous historical precedents for violence being done to those who are willing to speak out against these things. I'm a parent of 3 kids. I've got a teenager and 2 small children. I've got a wife who I love dearly, and putting them in danger simply because my face needs to be seen on television just doesn't seem wise. And I'd really rather my voice carry the message that we're trying to get across.
Now, Neil Gorsuch was also a student at Georgetown Prep. Is that right, Bill? Between you and Brett Kavanaugh, Kavanaugh senior, you a freshman, was Gorsuch a year above you?
Yes, he was a sophomore when I was a freshman.
Any comments?
When Neil was first nominated and then put onto the court, I accepted it as a pretty vanilla nomination on the part of the president. He wants to pack the court with reliable conservatives, and for as long as I've known Neil, he was a conservative. He made no bones about that when he was in high school. I think that the process through which Neil was nominated and the words that he used to describe his past and his experience are very different from how Brett has been acting and what he's been saying. And I'm no fan of Neil's. I really would love to see a much more progressive Supreme Court personally, but I accept the fact that we didn't win the election, and it's the prerogative of the president to nominate whoever he wants. But what I do want to see is someone of the deepest and most unimpeachable character and integrity on the court. And I feel that Neil can embody that, even if his politics differ from mine, in ways that I have very big concerns about Brett's.
Well, we want to thank you for being with us. Bill Barbeau, freshman at the all-male Georgetown Prep High School when Brett Kavanaugh was a senior. After Kavanaugh testified Thursday, Bill Barbeau co-authored a petition now of over 100 names calling on fellow graduates to come forward if they have information about any sexual assaults possibly committed by the Supreme Court nominee. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, the ACLU rarely takes a position on a Supreme Court nominee. When Brett Kavanaugh was first nominated, they wouldn't take a position. We had them on, and they were clear. They've changed their minds. Stay with us.
Held her down, I believe. Turn the music loud, I believe. So no one could hear, I believe her. Put his hands on her, I believe. Covered up her mouth, I believe. But the truth is out, I believe.
Her by Emma's Revolution. The band launched the song on Thursday in support of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and all sexual assault survivors. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, the American Civil Liberties Union has come out against the confirmation of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. It is only the fourth time in the organization's 98-year history that its National Board of Directors has voted to oppose a Supreme Court nominee. ACLU President Susan Herman said in a statement, quote, "There are credible allegations that Judge Kavanaugh has engaged in serious misconduct that have not been adequately investigated by the Senate. Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's credible testimony, subsequent allegations of sexual misconduct, the inadequate investigation, and Judge Kavanaugh's testimony at the hearing lead us to doubt Judge Kavanaugh's fitness to serve as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court." As a nonpartisan organization, the ACLU does not oppose Judge Kavanaugh based on predictions about how he would vote as a justice. We oppose him in light of the credible allegations of sexual assault against him. Unquote.
On the heels of the announcement, the ACLU launched a $1 million ad campaign across 4 states, urging key swing vote senators to vote against Kavanaugh's confirmation. This ad targets Colorado Republican Senator Cory Gardner.
We've seen this before, denials from powerful men.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
I've never seen anything like this.
I categorically and unequivocally deny the allegation against me by Dr. Ford.
America is watching. And as we choose a lifetime seat on our highest court, integrity matters, and we cannot have any doubt. Senator Gardner opposed the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh.
Similar ACLU ads address Nebraska Senator Deb Fischer, West Virginia's Joe Manchin, and Shelley Moore Capito. Interestingly, she went to Holton Arms, as did Dr. Ford. Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski and Senator Dan Sullivan, urging them to vote no on Kavanaugh. The last time the ACLU publicly opposed a Supreme Court nominee was over a decade ago, in 2006, when George W. Bush nominated Justice Samuel Alito. In 1987, the ACLU opposed President Ronald Reagan's nomination of Justice Robert Bork, and in 71, it opposed President Richard Nixon's nomination of Justice William Rehnquist. Well, for more, we're joined by Louise Melling, Deputy Legal Director at the ACLU and Director of its Center for Liberty, which encompasses the ACLU's work on reproductive freedom, women's rights, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender rights, freedom of religion and belief, and disability rights. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Louise.
Good morning.
So talk about this change of heart. We just had David Cole on when the Kavanaugh announcement was made. He said we cannot take a stand.
Yes. So I would say in brief, extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. As you talked about before, we didn't oppose Judge Kavanaugh when he was first nominated. We didn't oppose as the proceedings went forward. We issued a report talking about his record. We raised concerns about his civil liberties record in certain areas, but we adhered to our longstanding policy. But now, in light of the sexual assault allegations, we have come out to oppose Judge Kavanaugh, believing that those raise serious questions that are fundamentally different. They raise serious questions about the integrity of the court. Should he be on the court?
What are those concerns?
Well, I'll point to the Code of Judicial Conduct. The Code of Judicial Conduct talks about the importance of a judge behaving in a way that inspires public confidence in the integrity and the impartiality of the court. And when we look at Judge Kavanaugh's record in these proceedings, or what's come out, he is not behaving in a manner that will advance the public confidence in the integrity. I would point to, we have credible allegations of sexual assault. We have a judge who has resisted calling for a full investigation, what we would think of as central to any fair proceedings. And we have a judge who now, in the hearings last Thursday, talked about the allegations as a political hit, and as a political hit in response to payback, I believe was his word, for Trump and for Clinton. That bespeaks more of a partisan than a judicial temperament.
I wanted to ask about that because the hearing was really stunning in terms of the damages seen that Judge Kavanaugh did to himself in his testimony, in terms of the belligerence that he showed to the members of the Senate, and also the lack of what you might say judicial restraint in the way he approached the questions that were tossed at him. I'm wondering to what degree those hearings really galvanized the board to make this decision of the ACLU.
Well, the board was considering seriously the allegations of sexual assault and attempted rape. The board met after the hearing so that the board could have a chance to hear the witnesses, such as we had it. We, like others, have shared concerns about what kinds of investigation there is, how robust the hearing is, and whether there's a fair chance for both of them to tell their stories robustly. And in light of the allegations, and as Susan Herman's statement says, in light of the allegations, in light of the hearings, we came out to oppose.
And the decision to launch an ad campaign at the same time?
Well, the decision to launch the ad campaign, of course, followed the board's position, the board's vote that we would oppose. But now that we are opposing, it's incredibly important that we stand up. It's incredibly important that we stand up because of the message that any confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh would send to sexual assault survivors. It's important that we stand up, given what this would say about the integrity of the court. I can't reiterate enough how important it is that we believe in our systems, and to believe in the court requires us to believe that people, albeit human, are working as hard as they can to be impartial and fair.
So let's go to Judge Brett Kavanaugh giving his opening statement Thursday.
This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, fear that has been unfairly stoked about my judicial record, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups. This is a circus.
He talked about the Clinton conspiracy, et cetera, the millions spent by left-wing groups. He talked about left-wing conspiracies. His rage was almost uncontained. Now, does this mean that progressive groups that go before the Supreme Court should ask him to recuse himself? I mean, the fact of the matter is, right-wing groups have also spent millions of dollars. He is not raising this.
I think I would leave to another day questions of recusal, but I will say that we've had a lot of conversation about, we, the public, in discourse around nominations, about how they've become so partisan. What we saw here was the nominee himself engaging in partisan conduct. And I think your question, of course, raises for us a serious question about how will the public perceive a decision that comes out against a group like Planned Parenthood or the NAACP, for example, groups that have been opposing Kavanaugh. How will we assess the fairness and stand by the fairness of a decision that affects, quote, Democratic opponents, close quote, that might run to political gerrymandering or campaign finance or the census? Again, this is about how important it is for judges to really conduct themselves in a way that gives us confidence confidence that they're doing everything they can to be impartial as they hear cases before them.
I wanted to ask you, NBC News is reporting that there are some text messages that suggest that Brett Kavanaugh reached out to acquaintances to try to refute Deborah Ramirez's sexual assault claim before it became public. Are there any, if that's true, are there any concerns there about his conduct leading up to the hearings?
I certainly think, that it's incredibly important that we have had a hearing and that we have a full investigation. And a full investigation seems important both for the integrity of the opportunity for Judge Kavanaugh to clear his name, should that be the case, for Dr. Blasey Ford's allegations to be robustly heard and tested, and for the public to have confidence in a candidate. As our ad said, this is too important. We can have no doubt. So it's important for an investigation to look for the facts and to test the veracity of the statements that have been made.
I wanted to switch to another gear in the last minute we have with you, and that is the ACLU involvement with the migrant children issue. The New York Times reporting the Trump administration has begun transferring detained migrant children from shelters across the country to a barren tent city in West Texas. The Times reports hundreds of children being sent each week from shelters to the tent city, which currently houses 1,600 children. The facility reportedly has no school. Children have limited access to legal services. The U.S. government's now detaining a record 13,000 migrant children. Your thoughts on this latest news and what it means for these kids? We're talking about almost 2,000 children, if the government is even telling us the truth on that number.
I'm so glad you raised it, because I think it's incredibly important that this story break through, even in the midst of the incredibly important hearings about the Supreme Court. As you've indicated, this is just a horrific story. We have more children in detention now than ever before. We have children being bused in the middle of the night. We have children without school. This is all being done with our tax dollars, right? This is another reason to be reaching out to your members of Congress, to be urging them to stand up, including to sort of withhold and withdraw money from DHS.
And, of course, then you have the convergence of that issue with Kavanaugh, when Judge Kavanaugh, on the as a federal court judge now, actively got involved with the case of a migrant minor. She was 17 years old. This is the Garza case.
Yes.
And tried to prevent her from getting an abortion. That decision was overruled, and this young woman, Jane Doe, got the abortion. But it was Judge Kavanaugh now who intervened in that.
Judge Kavanaugh issued a decision, yes, that was going to, in the face of a ban on Jane Doe's access to an abortion, that was going to give the government time, shall we say, to continue to look for a sponsor, time that really meant further delay, time that didn't respect the fact that the government's obligation is not to bar any of us from having access to abortion.
Well, Louise Melling, we want to thank you for being with us, Deputy Legal Director at the ACLU. Again, in a rare move, the group has decided to oppose Judge Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court and is now running an ad campaign in key states to target senators on their position on Judge Kavanaugh. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, a new NAFTA? We'll talk with Lori Wallach. What does it mean? Stay with us. That music by the visionary Latin jazz musician Jerry Gonzalez. He died on Monday at the age of 69. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, the United States and Canada have reached a tentative agreement to save NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. The new trilateral deal will have a different name. It will be known as the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. President Trump celebrated the deal Monday.
It's my great honor to announce that we have successfully completed negotiations on a brand new deal to terminate and replace NAFTA and the NAFTA trade agreements with an incredible new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement called USMCA. It sort of just works, MCA. So we have negotiated this new agreement based on the principle of fairness and reciprocity. To me, it's the most important word in trade because we've been treated so unfairly by so many nations all over the world that we're changing that. Once approved by Congress, this new deal will be the most modern, up-to-date, and balanced trade agreement in the history of our country, with the most advanced protections for workers ever developed.
The Trump administration is touting the agreement as a victory for American dairy farmers since Canada has agreed to open parts of its dairy market to U.S. imports. But the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Trump withdrew from last year, would have provided the same opening. The new deal does not resolve a dispute over U.S. tariffs on Canada's steel and aluminum exports. The proposed agreement must now be ratified by lawmakers in the three countries. On Monday, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau hailed the tentative deal.
It's an agreement that, when enacted, will be good for Canadian workers, good for Canadian business, and good for Canadian families. It's an agreement that removes uncertainty for our manufacturers and investors and improves labor rights for all North Americans.
Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto, the outgoing Mexican president, outlined the benefits of the deal.
El nuevo acuerdo. The New Deal promotes more responsible regional commerce in the fields of labor and the environment. It drives the creation of more jobs and better salaries to the benefit of the workers of the three countries. It grants full certainty to international commerce and investment. It promotes the use of new technologies in business, financial services, and other sectors. It strengthens the competitiveness of North America as an industrial platform.
To talk more about the agreement, we go to Washington, where we're joined by Lori Wallach, Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, author of The Rise and Fall of Fast Track Trade Authority. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Lori. I haven't seen this explained in any comprehensible way. What is this new deal? How does it differ from NAFTA? And are you supporting it?
I think the jury's still out on where unions or groups like Public Citizen will be and Democrats in Congress, because it's still kind of a work in progress. The way I would describe the deal is it's not a transformational replacement of the old corporate-rigged system of trade agreements that really NAFTA hatched in the 1990s. But there actually are some important improvements, particularly with respect to those investor tribunals, the investor-state dispute settlement. But on the other hand, there are some new problems, really outrageous giveaways to big pharma. And there's a bunch of business that's just not completed. There's some really improved labor standards. There's a fairly impressive U.S.-Mexico labor rights agreement, but it's not yet subject to swift and certain enforcement, which makes all the difference. I would say if there had to be a position taken right now in this text, you would not see support from unions or groups like ours or most Democrats. But there's still a ways to go, not just what eventual text will be in Congress, because it's not until next year and the Democrats will be a majority, but also what might happen with implementing legislation, for instance, to fix the labor enforcement.
Lori, I wanted to ask you about two aspects in particular. You mentioned big pharma. What is going to be the impact, from what you can tell, of this on the fact that many Americans have been going for years now to Canada for cheap generic drugs that they'd otherwise have to pay much more for in the United States? And also, what's been going on with what's the deal say about the oil industry of Mexico, because the incoming president, López Obrador, has made it very clear that he does not want to open up the Mexican oil industry to outside investors. What happened with that?
Well, Lopez Obrador AMLO signed off on this deal. He had a negotiator there for the last 3 months. And to be 100% frank, I'm surprised in a way that they did, because there is some locking in of the existing privatization. It gives him discretion to reverse any further privatization of the oil sector. But the thing that's really peculiar, and actually the Mexican peasant farm movement has come out hollering about this, is even though AMLO's guy was at the table, they didn't do anything to change the rules in agriculture that would probably be necessary for AMLO to be able to deliver on his campaign promises to help support more small farming, rural economies. NAFTA made Mexico get rid of a whole system of subsidies and price supports, and there was no change to that part of the agreement. So several of the peasant farm groups, big supporters of AMLO, have said that's not agreeable, that has to change. AMLO said he's not going to change it and he's happy with the deal. As far as the pharma stuff, so this is, one of the worst parts of the agreement. The way I would describe this agreement in a way is, if the enforcement of the labor and environmental chapters was made much better, and the environmental chapter was fixed up some, and given they have largely removed investor-state dispute settlement threats, more on that later, then this could be a deal that was heading in the right direction, but for some bad things that got added in. And that is to say, the pharma stuff would give a 10-year exclusivity for biologic medicines. Those are the drugs that right now are sort of the cutting-edge cancer drugs. It's drugs that are used for Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis. And those drugs in the U.S. can be $100,000 per person per year. And so the U.S. already has a ridiculous, outrageous 12-year exclusivity. Obviously, we need to fight to get rid of that. So putting this into NAFTA could kind of handcuff the space Congress needs in the future to fix our problem. But exporting it to Mexico and Canada is really bad news. So for Mexico, they have no exclusivity. So from 0 to 10. And Canada, which was one of the countries that fought back against this in the TPP and won, totally caved. This was part of the U.S.-Mexico deal. Canada didn't fight back at all. And for Canada, they have an 8-year exclusivity. So probably for the folks who go over to Canada to get the meds, these are not those kind of meds. These are injectables. They have to be in the fridge. They're large molecule drugs. But there are all kinds of other things in that chapter that could make medicine in Canada more expensive. Things like what's called evergreening, ways to get longer patents after a patent kind of runs out. There's bad stuff. It's a bad chapter.
Dairy farmers, auto workers, can you explain what happens in each case?
So the agreement basically gives a little bit more access for U.S. dairy farmers into Canada. I don't know if that's good or bad, because basically it undermines what's called the supply management system in Canada, which is a system that has led for much more stable and better prices for Canadian small dairy farmers. We used to have that in the U.S., and NAFTA and WTO killed it. So it's I think, not a catastrophe for the Canadian farmers, and probably on balance better for the U.S. farmers. On auto workers, so one of the things that's innovative in the agreement, and that's new and kind of interesting if it works the way it's written, is for a certain share of completed autos and auto parts, the workers have to make $16 an hour or more in the jobs in order for those products to qualify for the NAFTA benefits. It's the first time there's been a wage link between the privileges of a trade agreement and what workers make. However, we have to see how that works in practice. There's also a really, probably the best thing in the whole agreement is they get rid of the broad investor rights that help promote outsourcing, that make it cheaper and less risky. And so, rules like the minimum standard of treatment are gone. With respect to the U.S. and Canada, the whole investor-state dispute settlement system is eliminated, terminated. It phases out in 3 years. With the U.S. and Mexico, they basically roll way back that system as far as the corporate rights. And then you can only get compensation for instance, the government actually taking your stuff, not just because an investor's expectation was undermined. And then there's some new procedures, for instance, to limit the amount of damages.
10 seconds, Laurie, for the most important aspect of this.
I would say the punchline is stay tuned and keep fighting. If we don't get members of Congress to push on the administration, the necessary labor and environmental enforcement's not going to happen, and then it's going to be a deal we're going to have to stop. If we can get these things fixed and next year we can get some of it improved, on wash, it could help stop some of NAFTA's ongoing damage. We will see. It's a work in progress.
Lori Wallach, thanks for being with us of Public Citizen. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our website's democracynow.org. Thanks so much for joining us.